Sophie's hands trembled as she smoothed the cream-colored invitation one more time, reading words that had become seared into her memory over the past 3 weeks. Mr. and Mrs. David Chun request the honor of your presence at the marriage of their daughter Jessica Chun to Michael Rodriguez. Reception to follow at the Grand Ballroom, Plaza Hotel. What the invitation didn't say, what it pointedly omitted, was any mention of Sophie Vasquez, the woman who had raised Jessica for 18 years as a single mother, who had worked double shifts at the hospital to pay for her daughter's violin lessons, her college tuition, her study abroad semester in London. Before we dive in, take a moment to drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? I love seeing how far these stories reach across the globe. And if this one already has you hooked, don't wait, hit that subscribe button now. I've got another powerful story dropping tomorrow, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. Now, let's get into it. The phone call 3 weeks ago had been brief, clinical. "Mom, I've decided to have David walk me down the aisle," Jessica had said, her voice carrying that particular tone of forced casualness she'd perfected in recent years. "It just makes more sense, you know? He's been like a father to me these past few years, and his family is helping pay for the wedding." Sophie had stood in her small kitchen, still wearing her scrubs from another 12-hour shift, staring at the acceptance letter to Jessica's medical school that she'd kept magneted to the refrigerator, the same medical school Sophie had worked overtime for 2 years to help fund before Jessica found her real family. "I see," Sophie had managed. "And where would you like me to sit?" The pause stretched like a chasm. "Well, that's the thing. Michael's family is really traditional, and David's family, they've been so generous with everything. It might be less complicated if ... double quotes." Sophie closed her eyes. "If I don't come. It's not that I don't want you there, Mom. It's just that I'm an embarrassment." The words came out sharper than Sophie intended. The single mother who couldn't give you the picture-perfect family. "That's not fair." Jessica's voice turned defensive, the same tone she'd used as a teenager when caught in a lie. "You know how hard this has been for me, trying to balance." "Balance what, Jessica?" "The mother who sacrificed everything for you, or the stepfather who came along when you were already grown." The line went quiet except for Jessica's breathing. Sophie had met David Chun at Jessica's college graduation 3 years ago. He was recently divorced, successful, charming, everything Sophie had never had the luxury of being while working 70-hour weeks to keep them afloat. Jessica had started spending holidays with David's family, summers at their lake house, eventually moving in with them during medical school to save money. The transition had been gradual, like watching someone slip away grain by grain. First, it was missing their traditional Sunday dinners because David's family had invited her skiing. Then it was canceling their annual mother-daughter trip to see Jessica's grandmother because David was taking her to Europe. Each time, Jessica had logical explanations, and Sophie had swallowed her hurt, telling herself she should be happy her daughter was experiencing the stability she'd always wished she could provide. But logic couldn't explain away the Christmas morning Sophie spent alone while Jessica posted photos from David's family's mansion, everyone wearing matching pajamas like a magazine spread. It couldn't rationalize the phone calls that grew shorter and less frequent, or the way Jessica now referred to David's wife Susan as Mom in casual conversation, as if Sophie was slowly being erased from her own story. Sophie remembered the exact moment she realized she was losing Jessica. It was during Jessica's 2nd year of medical school, when Sophie had driven 4 hours to surprise her daughter for her birthday. She'd arrived at David's house. Jessica now lived there full-time, carrying a homemade cake and the antique stethoscope that had belonged to Sophie's own mother, a nurse who died when Sophie was 16. David had answered the door, polite but clearly uncomfortable. "Oh, Sophie." We weren't expecting you. Through the window, Sophie could see Jessica in the living room, surrounded by David's family, laughing at something Susan had said. When Jessica finally came to the door, her smile was strained. "Mum, you should have called," she'd said, not moving to hug Sophie or invite her in. "We're having a family dinner." "I am family," Sophie had replied. Quietly, Jessica's face flushed. "You know what I mean. It's complicated when you just show up." Sophie had stood on the doorstep of the house her overtime had helped Jessica afford to live in, holding a cake she'd decorated with 24 candles, and realized that somewhere along the way, she'd become the inconvenient relative, the one who didn't fit the narrative of Jessica's new, improved life. She'd left the cake and the stethoscope and driven home in silence, stopping only once at a gas station to cry in the parking lot where no one could see her. The irony was devastating. Sophie had spent years dreaming of the day Jessica would have everything: a loving family, financial security, opportunities Sophie never had. She just never imagined that everything would explicitly exclude her. Now, holding the invitation she wasn't supposed to have received, Jessica's friend Maria had slipped it to her, horrified that Jessica hadn't invited her own mother. Sophie felt the full weight of 24 years collapse onto her shoulders. 24 years since she'd held a screaming newborn in a county hospital, promising she'd give this child everything she never had. She thought about Jessica's father, Marcus, who'd disappeared the moment Sophie told him she was pregnant. She'd been 19, a nursing student working nights to pay for school, and suddenly she was facing motherhood alone. Her own parents had disowned her, calling her pregnancy a shame on the family. Sophie had dropped out of school, moved to a studio apartment above a laundromat, and started working as a nurse's aide while Jessica slept in a dresser drawer because she couldn't afford a crib. 24 years of bologna, sandwiches so Jessica could have fresh fruit in her lunch. 24 years of Sophie's own dreams deferred, her own needs ignored, her own life shrunk down to fit into the margins of her daughter's expanding world. Sophie walked to Jessica's old bedroom, now her storage room. Hidden in the closet was a box she hadn't opened in years filled with Jessica's report cards, her childhood artwork, photos of just the two of them from those early years, when they were a complete universe unto themselves. She pulled out a photo from Jessica's 8th birthday party. It was just the two of them in their tiny apartment kitchen. Jessica wearing a paper crown Sophie had made from newspaper and glitter, both of them laughing at something the camera couldn't capture. Sophie remembered that day perfectly. She'd worked a double shift the night before and had exactly $37 until her next paycheck. But she'd managed to buy cake mix, ice cream, and a small toy Jessica had been wanting for months. "This is the best birthday ever, Mama," Jessica had said that night, curled up next to Sophie on their second-hand couch. "I don't need anybody else. As long as I have you." Sophie continued through the box, each item a small monument to sacrifice. Jessica's perfect attendance certificate from elementary school earned because Sophie had dragged herself to work even when she had pneumonia. Because missing a shift meant no grocery money. Jessica's honor roll certificates possible because Sophie had spent her own study time helping with homework instead of pursuing the nursing degree she'd deferred for 15 years. There was the program from Jessica's high school graduation, where Jessica had given a speech about overcoming obstacles and thanked her teachers, her guidance counselor, her friends' parents who'd helped her with college applications. Sophie, sitting in the audience in her one good dress, had waited through the entire speech for her name to be mentioned. It never was. That night, Jessica had found Sophie crying in the kitchen. "What's wrong, Mom?" "I was just ... I was proud of your speech," Sophie had lied. "You seemed upset." Sophie had looked at her daughter, brilliant, beautiful, bound for greatness, and made a choice that would define their relationship forever. Instead of explaining her hurt, instead of asking for acknowledgement, she'd swallowed her pain and smiled. "I'm just emotional because my baby is growing up," she'd said. It was the first of many times Sophie would choose Jessica's comfort over her own truth. At the bottom of the box was a Mother's Day card from when Jessica was 8, written in careful cursive. "Dear Mum, thank you for being the best mom in the world. You work so hard for me and I love you more than infinity. When I grow up, I want to be just like you. Love, Jessica. P.S. I will always take care of you like you take care of me." Sophie held the card and felt something break inside her chest. Not Jessica's promised children make promises they can't keep. She understood that. What broke was the realization that she'd spent 16 years waiting for Jessica to remember this promise, waiting to be taken care of the way she'd taken care of everyone else. Sophie thought about the conversations she'd never had with Jessica, about how she'd given up her own dreams of becoming a registered nurse because she couldn't afford school and childcare simultaneously, about how she'd never dated seriously because she'd been terrified of bringing men around Jessica who might leave, about how she'd turned down 3 different job opportunities in other cities because she didn't want to disrupt Jessica's education. She'd never told Jessica about the nights she'd gone to bed hungry so Jessica could have seconds at dinner. She'd never mentioned the Christmas she told Jessica that Santa was economizing that year, giving fewer but better gifts, when the truth was Sophie had been laid off for 3 weeks and could barely afford rent. She'd never explained why she worked every holiday, every weekend, every chance for overtime, not because she loved work, but because love required money, and money required sacrifice. Sophie had kept a mental ledger of these sacrifices for years, not because she wanted gratitude, but because she wanted Jessica to understand the weight of the love that had built her life. But she'd never spoken the numbers aloud, and now it seemed too late. She remembered Jessica's junior year of college, when Jessica had called home crying because she couldn't afford to join her friends on spring break in Cancun. "Everyone is going, Mom. I'll be the only one stuck here. Can't you help me?" Sophie had looked at her bank account, $247, until payday, and thought about the insulin she was rationing because she couldn't afford both her diabetes medication and Jessica's textbooks that month. "I'll figure something out, sweetheart," she'd said. She'd taken an extra job cleaning offices at night, working until 2 a.m. for 3 weeks to earn the money. Jessica had gone to Cancun and posted photos of herself on beaches, in restaurants, laughing with friends whose parents could afford such things without sacrifice. When she'd returned, she'd hugged Sophie and said, "Thanks, Mom. You're the best." But she'd never asked how Sophie had found the money. She'd never wondered why Sophie looked exhausted, why she'd lost weight, why she'd started falling asleep during their phone calls. Sophie's phone buzzed, pulling her from her memories. A text from David. "Sophie, I hope you understand this isn't personal. Jessica loves you, but today needs to be about her new beginning. Maybe we can all have dinner soon to talk." Sophie stared at the message, recognizing the gentle condescension of someone who had never had to choose between groceries and rent, who had never loved someone so much that you disappeared yourself in service of their dreams. David, with his successful medical practice, and his beautiful home and his stable marriage to Susan, couldn't comprehend the arithmetic of Sophie's love. She thought about David's generous family, the family that had swooped in during Jessica's final years of college and claimed her as their own. They'd given Jessica what Sophie never could: a picture-perfect family for her social media posts, a lake house for summer vacations, the kind of financial security that made life look effortless. But Sophie had given Jessica something else: fierce, desperate love of someone who had nothing else to lose. She'd given Jessica her entire identity, her whole future, her complete devotion. And somehow, in the cruel mathematics of human relationships, that had made her love worth less than David's comfortable affection. The wedding was in 4 hours. Sophie had taken the day off, originally planning to get her hair done, to wear the navy dress she'd bought months ago, when she still believed she'd be there to watch her daughter promise her life to someone else. Sophie typed back to David, "Of course. Congratulations to Jessica." Then she turned off her phone and sat in the silence of her small apartment, finally understanding that sometimes the greatest love asks you to let go completely, even when letting go means watching everything you've ever loved walk away without looking back. She thought about calling Jessica, about making one last plea, about explaining everything she'd never said. But she knew it wouldn't matter. Jessica had made her choice, and it was the choice of someone who'd never had to sacrifice anything, who'd never learned that love could be a weight as well as a gift. Sophie opened her laptop and began to type, "Dear Jessica, by the time you read this, your wedding will be over. I want you to know that I understand why you made the choices you did. David can give you the family you've always wanted, the stability I could never provide. I've spent the last few hours remembering our life together, and I realize I never told you about the woman I was before I became your mother. I was going to be a registered nurse. I was going to travel. I was going to write poetry and maybe fall in love with someone who would stay. Instead, I became the woman who loved you more than life itself. And I need you to know that I don't regret it. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every dollar I didn't spend on myself, it was all worth it, to give you the chance to become the woman you are today. But I also need you to understand something. Love isn't just receiving care, it's recognizing it. It's not just accepting sacrifice, it's honoring it. And somewhere along the way, I failed to teach you that lesson. I wanted to give you everything I never had. But in doing so, I never showed you what it cost. I protected you from the weight of my love, and now you don't know how to carry it. I won't be at your wedding today, not because I don't want to be there, but because you've made it clear that my presence would complicate the story you're telling about your life. I am the inconvenient chapter you'd rather skip. But I need you to know. You are my greatest love and my greatest heartbreak. You are the reason I became strong, and the reason I learned I could break. You are everything I've ever been proud of, and the proof that love alone isn't enough. I hope your marriage brings you joy. I hope David's family continues to give you what I couldn't. And I hope someday, when you love someone as completely as I've loved you, you'll understand what we lost when you chose to leave me behind. Love always." Mom Sophie printed the letter, folded it carefully, and placed it in an envelope. She would mail it tomorrow, after the wedding was over and Jessica was officially part of another family. Outside, the world continued its routine celebrations of love and family and new beginnings. Inside, Sophie began the process of learning how to live with the particular grief of being loved, but not enough. She looked around her small apartment, the same apartment where she'd raised Jessica, where they'd made memories that, apparently, weren't worth preserving. For the first time in 24 years, she began to imagine what her life might look like if it wasn't organized around someone else's needs. Maybe she could finally finish nursing school. Maybe she could travel, even if just for a weekend. Maybe she could learn to love someone who would love her back with the same intensity she'd given Jessica. Sophie picked up the Mother's Day card one more time, reading Jessica's 8-year-old promise to take care of her. Then she placed it back in the box, closed the lid, and put the box back in the closet. Some promises, she realized, were never meant to be kept. They were just the beautiful lies children tell their parents to make the sacrifice feel worthwhile. Sophie, changed into comfortable clothes, made herself a cup of tea, and sat down to begin the hardest chapter of her life. Learning to live for herself. after spending 2 decades living for someone else. The wedding would happen without her. Jessica would dance with David, smile for photographs with her new family, and begin a life where Sophie was just a distant memory, the woman who'd raised her before her real life began. And Sophie would be here, in this small apartment finally, free to discover who she was when she wasn't being someone's everything. It was terrifying and liberating and heartbreaking all at once. But for the first time in 24 years, her time was her own. 6 hours later, as Sophie sat reading a book she'd bought for herself, the first book she'd purchased that wasn't. For Jessica's education, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mrs. Vasquez, this is Maria, Jessica's friend. I thought you should know that Jessica spent the entire reception asking people if they'd seen you." She kept looking toward the door. "I think she thought you'd come anyway. I'm sorry this happened. You deserved better." Maria Sophie read the message twice, then set her phone aside and continued reading her book. Some bridges, once burned, take time and mutual effort to rebuild. Some loves, once betrayed, require new foundations to heal. That they were always meant to teach us something about ourselves. 2 years later, Sophie graduated from nursing school on a sunny Thursday morning in May. At 51, she was the oldest student in her class, but she walked across that stage with the same pride she'd once felt watching Jessica achieve her milestones. The difference was that, this time, the pride belonged entirely to her. In the audience sat 3 people. Her study group partner Marcus, not Jessica's father, a different Marcus, a kind widower she'd been dating for 8 months. Her supervisor, from the hospital who'd become a mentor, and, to her surprise, Jessica had shown up unannounced, sitting in the back row, crying quietly as Sophie received her degree. They hadn't spoken since the wedding, though Jessica had sent cards, birthday cards, holiday cards, graduation congratulations, all of which Sophie had acknowledged politely but briefly. After the ceremony, Jessica approached hesitantly. "Mom, I'm proud of you," she said, the words carrying weight they hadn't held in years. Sophie studied her daughter's face. Jessica looked older, more tired. The easy confidence she'd worn like armor during her medical school years had been replaced by something more fragile. "Thank you for coming," Sophie said simply. "I've been in therapy," Jessica said suddenly. "About us. About what I did. About what I took for granted." Sophie nodded but didn't respond immediately. She'd learned in her own therapy started 6 months after the wedding that she didn't need to rush to make other people feel better about their choices. "I wrote you a letter," Jessica continued, pulling an envelope from her purse. "I don't expect you to read it now, or respond. I just wanted you to know that I understand now. What you gave up, what I cost you, and what I threw away." Sophie accepted the letter. "I'm glad you're getting help, Jessica. Everyone deserves to understand themselves better. Do you think," Jessica's voice cracked, "do you think we could maybe have coffee sometime?" "I know I don't deserve it, but..." "Jessica," Sophie interrupted, gently, "I'm not the same person who would have said yes to anything you asked, just to keep you in my life. If we're going to rebuild this, it has to be different. It has to be equal." Jessica nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know. I want it to be different too. I want to know who you are, when you're not just being my mother." Sophie felt something shift in her chest, not forgiveness exactly, but possibility. "Call me next week," she said. "We'll see." As Jessica walked away, Marcus approached, slipping his hand into Sophie's. "You okay?" he asked. Sophie watched her daughter disappear into the crowd of celebrating families. "I'm learning to be," she said. Takeaway reflections for parents. Love without boundaries becomes a burden, not a gift. Teaching children to recognize and reciprocate. Sacrifice is as important as making the sacrifice itself. Your worth isn't measured by how much you give up for your children. Martyrdom doesn't create gratitude. It often creates entitlement. Children need to see you as a whole person with your own dreams and needs, not just as their support system. When you disappear yourself, for them, you teach them that your value lies only in what you provide. It's never too late to reclaim your own life and identity. The love you've given doesn't disappear when you start loving yourself too. For adult children, the sacrifices your parents made weren't invisible. You just stopped seeing them. Recognizing the weight of their love is crucial to healthy relationships. Success doesn't erase the foundation that built it. When you achieve your dreams, remember who helped make them possible. New relationships, romantic partners, stepfamilies, in-laws, should add to your life, not replace the people who created it. It's never too late to acknowledge what you took for granted, that some damage takes time and effort to repair, and some wounds may never fully heal. For everyone, love isn't just about giving or receiving. It's about seeing and honoring what's being exchanged. Every relationship requires balance. When one person consistently gives and the other consistently takes, the relationship will eventually collapse under that weight. Growth sometimes means disappointing people who benefited from your previous limitations. The most profound love stories aren't just about staying together. Sometimes they're about learning when to let go, and how to love yourself enough to demand better. The ultimate truth. Real love, the kind that lasts, the kind that heals, the kind that builds rather than depletes, requires two people who are willing to see each other fully, to give and receive in measure, and to honor the weight of what they've been given. Sophie's story reminds us that sometimes the greatest act of love is teaching someone that love has limits, and that those limits make love more precious, not less.